Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference, and I would like to present you some results of my working with oral history sources and with actually non-Jewish testimonies about the Holocaust in Ukraine, testimonies which already published, which which already collected, and testimonies which I collected on my own. In nearly 7 decades of collecting the materials and documents of the Holocaust had been accumulated a significant amount of evidence, memoirs, eyewitnesses, interviews. These materials certainly constitute an important and highly informative group of sources, oral history. The majority of them are the memories of the Jews who in some way was managed to survive. These memories are different in character, form of narrative and methods that were used in dealing with the respondents. But such evidences reflect reality only under certain conditions, visible to the victim's point of view. Being located in the epicenter of events, having regard to the extreme conditions and stress state doomed to death and fortunately saved, the Jews were not always able to accurately reconstruct the situation during the immediate destruction and entirely objectively describe the local population attitude to the policy of persecuting the Jews, because their experience was largely based on a direct involvement with the hostile environment in which they had to survive during the German occupation. They were not focused on the comprehensive recording of the events, therefore some aspects had been lost or lopsided covered in their stories. And memories of external witnesses not only help to supplement the historical picture by the actual details, but often is almost the only narrative source of information about destruction of the Jewish community of some inhabited locality, especially in small towns or villages where there were no Jewish survivors. Nobody survived, and the non-Jewish witnesses are the only witnesses. It is also necessary to apply this evidence defining public perception of the Holocaust as Gentiles were the majority of this society, and from within could see how their neighbors and surrounding reacted and estimated the policies of Nazi against the Jews. First of all, I want to tell briefly about the most well-known, the most famous writings, published memories of non-Jewish witnesses of the Holocaust. And among well-known published works that contains such memories should be called a documentary novel Babi Yar by Anatoly Kuznetsov, and the other one, Shoah in Lviv by Eugen Nakonieczny. The genre of these texts can be defined as memoir essays because they are composed of memories, thoughts, and sometimes historical overviews. Each of these works is representative of the corresponding region of Ukraine. For example, one of them, Babi Yar, is representative for central eastern part of Ukraine, and the other one, Shoah in Lviv, naturally is representative for western part of Ukraine. However, they are distinguished not only by geographic impact of the writings, but also by time of creating memories and by the motivation of the authors. Thus, a documentary novel, Babi Yar, as it is generally known, was the first one which was published in 1966 in the Soviet magazine Yunast. The text of the novel in this edition was distorted by the significant reduction because of explicit anti-Soviet thoughts that censorship could not permit. Only in 1991, the Babi Yar was published in Moscow and in Kiev in the full version. The main idea of the creation of these memoirs is a protest against the silence and the erase of the sites of mass destruction of thousands of people, civilians of various nationalities, prisoners of war, and mentally ill and others. The author describes his memories of shooting the Kiev Jews, by which the Nazi began the mass extermination of the population of the city as a whole. He delivers bright, lively stories concerning social relations, life and survival in occupied Kiev. It was the first and only of such kind of narrative source created during the Soviet period. As for another writing above mentioned, Shoah in Lviv, it was written under completely another conditions and published much later in 2006 in Lviv, and its author Evgen Nakonechny, a Ukrainian historian and linguist, has created these memoirs already being in old age, and the work appeared as a reaction to overstatement of Ukrainian anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish actions of Ukrainian nationalists during the Holocaust. Therefore, the main mission of these memories is objectively to show Ukrainian and Jewish relations as the author remembered them in his city, and resorting to the historical comments which occasionally accompanied the narration. Nakonechny not always submitted correct information or completely silent, consciously or unconsciously, the facts that might discredit the Ukrainian nationalistic organization. For example, the Ukrainian researcher of the Holocaust, Jan Koba, reviewed the book. Among the other comments, noted that the author, because of unknown reason, doesn't comment, although briefly mentions the prominent leaders of the ONB, Stechko and Lenkovsky, the documents that highlight the position of the ONB in relation to the Jewish issue. Thus, a characteristic feature of this writing is that its vector predefined, aimed at proof of certain position of the author. Generally, it should be mentioned that both authors had talent for writing and some experience, because these writings were not their first books. And these two memoirs undoubtedly have literary value that distinguishes them from other non-Jewish sources. They are unique and unusual because belong to the representatives of humanitarian intellectuals. In 2004, the first large-scale project aimed at collecting, documenting the evidence of the Holocaust of local Gentile population began. It was initiated by the organization Yahad in Unum, led by French Catholic priest Patrick Dubois, who has been studying the Holocaust in Ukraine, Belarus and Russia since 2002. Initially, his purpose was finding and excavation of mass graves of Jews killed by the Nazis, and for this it was conducted and an interviewing of the local population. For several years of expedition of Ukrainian towns and villages, this organization has collected about 1,500 video interviews with local non-Jewish residents who were the witnesses of the Holocaust. These materials were systematized and transferred to the archive of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and these videos are of a major interest to researchers of the Holocaust history and ethnographers, and can be used both historians and sociologists. And slightly later, another project of collecting the non-Jewish memories of the Holocaust has started to work in 2006. The Ukrainian Center of Holocaust Studies in Kiev conducted the first school field studies in oral history, the Holocaust through the eyes of the Gentile population, on the example of Crimea, and the respondents were Russian, Ukrainian, Crimean Tatars, etc. The students of several universities in Ukraine involved as interviewers, and during the interview they used a specially developed method which provided narrative semi-structure to the biographical interview, which included a wide spectrum of issues, mapping the events of the Holocaust in popular memory, behaviors and reactions to anti-Jewish policy, the issue of collaboration as well, and the impact of anti-Semitic propaganda in Jewish and Ukrainian relations during the war and after the war. All of these issues can be studied on the basis of the analysis of data memories. In 2006, the second such field school, the Holocaust through the eyes of the Gentiles, took place already on the other territory, on the territory of Khmelnytskaya, it's the western Ukrainian territory. And the materials collected during these studies are kept in the archive of Ukrainian Center for Holocaust Studies in Kiev. And also in my personal archive, testimonies archive, there is a collection of interviews which were collected different regions of Ukraine by specially designed questionnaire, and the main group of my respondents were people with secondary education or post-secondary education who lived most of his life in the city, or can be considered as so-called embodiment of ordinary Soviet citizen. And they were not necessarily direct witness of the destruction of the Jews, and they just should be the contemporaries of this period, or maybe also representatives of the first post-war generation, also included to the group of my respondents. So basically, respondents could have either their own memories of the war or perceived the memories, still fresh post-war memories of their parents or relatives. The memories have a form of personal narrative. Analyzing one can be done a number of generalization on the regional basis. Fortunately, I can't tell now about all aspects I was able to define during the interviews, but just only will make a few generalization. For example, in the central eastern Ukraine, in the memory of contemporary and post-war generation, the Holocaust reflected less than in the West, mentioning that neighbors and Jewish friends went to the evacuation predominated. Among the first victims of the occupation regime, the respondents from this region called mostly Soviet partisans or war prisoners. In the stories, respondents often tell about war prisoners camps and public executions of partisans, with minimal information or even absence of information about the fate of Jews in the occupation. This situation is explained by the extremely calm final solution of the Jewish question in the central and eastern Ukraine, which in cities and towns took from a few weeks to a few days. Indeed, in this region, especially in large cities, most of the Jewish population was evacuated, and under the Nazi occupation remained the relative minority of the Jews. Typically, in a short time, they were ordered together at a certain point, and the column of people followed to the place of execution. Local residents who had no direct personal contact with the Jews and lived in other parts of the city under the constant risk did not leave their home unless absolutely necessary, and obviously could not pay attention and did not remember shooting the Jews. Of course, adults could learn some details firsthand from those who lived near the sites of shooting and could see it, but they would hardly tell it to their children, and specifically the respondents were children at that time. So that is the reason why they had minimum information about it. According to their testimonies of a later period when people began to come from evacuation, the Jews who returned to their homes never shared their remembrances about the Holocaust, killed relatives and other even with neighbors and friends. Unlike Reichsmissariat Ukraine, in the district Galicia, the process of extermination of the Jews was much longer and had several stages. Their way was through anti-Jewish pogroms of the first weeks of occupation, wherein the Star of David moving and survival in ghetto labor camps, and only then the final murder. Due to the fact of their anti-Jewish actions, successively changed one another, and in total it was stretched for several years. To overlook or ignore the Nazi anti-Semitic policy, even in the most close way of life, was impossible. In the memories of Lviv resident woman who was born just after the occupation were conveyed her mother's story of persecution and execution of Jews in the street of the city and in ghetto. Jewish neighbors of this family was for some time after the beginning of the German occupation were living in the same apartment and were sharing their hardship with the other. After the relocation to the ghetto, connection was lost. In analyzing these memories, we should take into account the reality which person was in. For example, if somebody had direct experience of close communication or coexistence with the Jews, then their tragedy would rather cause empathy and occasionally was articulated in the inter-family circle. To the list of the questions also included the unit related to the post-war period, which allows to explore how the memory of the Holocaust was preserved and how effective were the state mechanism of formation of the official memories model. It depended heavily on personal experience, but it should be noted that the Central and Eastern Ukraine official memories model had much greater impact on the consciousness of the population than in Western one. Of course, there was a small group of humanitarian intellectuals who read books, Ehrenburg, Grossman, Kuznetsov, in which directly or indirectly the topic of genocide of the Jews featured. But this group didn't have a significant impact on public opinion. And I go to my conclusions already. Thus, the perception of the Holocaust by a Gentile population in Western and Central Eastern Ukraine, because of objective reason, was significantly different. This was due to some differences in the implementation of Nazi policy toward the Jews, historical realities and inter-ethnic relations. which had evolved before the war. If in Soviet Ukraine during 20th, 30s of 20th century, their idea of internationalism was being cultivated in the same time in Western Ukraine, nationality, ethnicity mattered, and we can observe certain distinctiveness of ethnic communities. The same principle was reflected in the explaining by respondent the reason for the silencing the genocide of the Jews by the Soviet authority and refusing to recognize them as a separate category of victims of the Nazi occupiers. In Western Ukraine, this approach of Soviet power in the area of memory was explained by politics of the hidden anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union and in more Sovietized Central East, noted that international character of the state in which was unacceptable to emphasize the ethnicity of citizens. That's it. Thank you much.